in this kind of society an exchange relationship. I give to you on the reasonable expectation that you'll give back to me an equal amount of whatever, time and energy and caring or what. Then you might say, well, what's wrong with that? That's just an equal exchange, a nice little market relationship that works wonderfully. The problem is that as people get older, or even not older but sick, and they're not able to give back an equal amount of time and energy, they find that their friends seem to be disappearing. They're not there for them as much. It's not that anybody who is not there for them is thinking, oh, I won't get a good return on my investment of time and energy here. It's just that the whole way, the basic consciousness that people have about what a friendship is, an exchange relationship, just doesn't seem to be happening as much there. People report at that age that they remember, or at least they remember their parents telling them about, a time when friendships were based on the principle of solidarity. Solidarity meant you're there for other people regardless of whether they can give you a reasonable return on your investment of time or energy with them. You're there for them simply because you care for them. But in a world in which what it is to be rational in this society is to maximize your own advantage, in that kind of a world, the being there for them decreases dramatically. And the amount of energy that one can give to that decreases dramatically. It seems almost irrational to be there for other people when you're not getting anything, not going to be able to get as much back. This has tremendous impact in many, many areas of life. Let's talk about the dating world, in which, now for the dating world and relationships, we want to transform the language slightly, because here, when people are looking out for their own advantage, they translate it into this dominant paradigm into the language of psychologies. And in psychologies, what looking out for number one turns out to be is, I'm looking for a relationship that will satisfy my needs. And what I'm looking for is, so I want to have my needs satisfied. Now, in the earlier years of dating, let's say for most people from the ages, someplace between 18 and 35, let's say, the dating world actually does resemble fairly much like a big supermarket, in which you go in and there are all these attractively wrapped things on the supermarket shelf, and each competing for how they can be most attractively wrapped. And then you go and you taste one, and you might taste that for a night, or you might taste it for a month, or you might taste it for a year and a half or three, or as long as the ride is interesting, and then you can discard and go to the next, and then to the next, and then to the next. So that what we learned from the younger people we were interviewing, that is people roughly starting from about 27 on up, just 27 to 35, is that by the time you've been in this dating world for 8-10 years, almost everyone has no, I'm saying other people we're studying, which is middle income Americans, okay, has a deep cynicism about who's out there. They've had a lot of experiences of either being used or using. Using, I say, because we found that the younger women had an ideology around that they thought was feminist that said, look, I know that this is what it's about, and I'm not going to be some passively used by others. I'll use my sexuality to use others. I'm going to be just as strong and just as successful in manipulating others as others have been in the past, as men have been in manipulating women in the past. I can do the same thing. So, but anyway, by the time people are around that age, they've already had a decade worth of experience of being used and using others for the sake of having whatever is maximizing my own advantage and having what will satisfy my needs and make me feel like I'm having a good experience here. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not putting anybody down here. I'm not making any judgments. I'm merely describing how people, that the consequence of this is that people have a deep cynicism about who the others are that they're likely to meet in the society. And that cynicism, dramatically reinforced by the media and dramatically reinforced by their experiences day in and day out in the world of work, in which everybody's looking out for number one, leads people to a point in which relationships increasingly, particularly when people get to the point where they're saying, oh, I've had enough of the marketplace of relationships, which isn't so easy because there's always more attractively wrapped products on the supermarket shelf. And why should you stop now when who knows what's in the next one? But anyway, a lot of people do stop at and when they stop, are ready to make a commitment to somebody, commitments increasingly become based on the following kind of thinking. I want to settle down now. I want to make a commitment. I'm going to live with a person, or I'm going to marry somebody or whatever. So I want to find the person who will satisfy my needs more than anyone else. And so when I find such a person, my determination or my commitment to you is this. Amongst the people whom I imagine are likely to fall for me in the short run, because I'm no longer wanting to be in the marketplace forever, amongst the people who are likely to fall for me in the short run, you will satisfy more of my needs than anybody else I'm likely to come across. So I'm committed. Now, you might say, first of all, well, what's wrong with that? Well, let me tell you, there's nothing. I'm not making any judgment about this. I'm saying that this is how people experience what commitment becomes increasingly. So that a marriage, so that a loving relationship is consciously or unconsciously generated by that sense of, yeah, amongst, like the people who are likely to fall for me, you're the best one. You're going to satisfy more of my needs than anyone else I'm likely to meet. And I say, I'm not making any judgment about this. But the consequence of it is a dramatic upsurge of insecurity amongst most people in the society. Because they suspect, usually quite reasonably, that their partner, if their partner is equally rational to who they are, and they think that they're probably just as smart and so forth, that their partner also is making that same calculation. That amongst the people he or she is likely to meet in the short run, you satisfy more of their needs than anyone else who's likely to fall for them. Why does this generate insecurity? Well, it generates insecurity because from that point on, when you get this, or you suspect it, or you intuitively grasp it without ever putting it into words, you know that at any point, your husband or wife, your partner, might find at some point in their life someone else who would satisfy yet more of their needs than you can. And then, as a rational person in the society, where a rational person is a maximizer of self-interest, as a rational maximizer of self-interest, of course, they're going to try to cut a better deal. Do you see what I'm saying here? They're going to try to cut a better deal because this is just what it is to be rational. It's to find the best possible way to satisfy your own needs. So why shouldn't I go to this other person if I have some reasonable expectation that she or he will satisfy more of my needs? And this generates tremendous insecurity. Yeah. Okay. Trust me that, okay. Right? Trust me that getting all of this is more important than what we can do. Because if you understand the pain that's going on around you in the society, then you start to get a feeling for why it is that liberal ideas don't quite get there. And that's essentially what I'm trying to talk to here, is why the liberal or progressive agenda isn't deep enough yet. So give me another few minutes on this, okay? All right. So So the way this plays out, it doesn't play out the same for everybody. It depends on your class position and many other factors, because the basic issue about how insecure people are, and I say this transcends, but this insecurity goes through the whole society, because it's not just the 50% of marriages in America that end in divorce. It's also the 50% that don't end in divorce, because most people don't know which of those two categories they're in. They don't know for sure that their relationships are going to last or not. And so the insecurity is very strong. But how much it affects you depends on your own assessment of your own marketability in the marketplace of relationships. If you are, to the extent that you are younger, more conventionally attractive, or more financially secure, these issues don't really weigh that much on you. Conversely, to the extent that you are older, or less conventionally attractive, or less financially secure, these issues become huge, huge issues of insecurity. So the insecurity is stratified through the society depending on these factors that shape your own consciousness about your own potential marketability. And you may feel very strong in your 20s and 30s and think anybody who worries about that, they're just a fool, right? And then when you're in your 50s or 60s, it's a whole different ballpark in which this may be obsessing about this, because your potential marketability has shifted dramatically. I don't expect people here to quite get this until it's ever happened to you. But you get it? Okay. But your marketability is strong, you know? Nevertheless, you know. Okay. 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 Now, I am not here to challenge, to put anybody down or to make a moral condemnation of any of this. I'm trying to tell you that when people are thinking in these terms about other human beings, it's almost impossible to not think this way and grow up in this society. To think about other human beings through this framework is so deeply embedded in the mass culture and in the experience of living in capitalist society with its generation of the world of work, of the consciousness of looking out for number one, and maximizing self-interest as the only rational way to be. So I'm certainly not going to want to judge anybody for this kind of consciousness. It seems like it's the only possible way to be. Now, it isn't the only possible way to be. There is another consciousness that we call a spiritual consciousness. A spiritual consciousness is a consciousness that looks at other human beings and sees her or sees him as fundamentally valuable, not just for what she or he can deliver for you, but because he or she is an embodiment of the sacred. Or if the word sacred or created in the image of God, or if all that just generates in you resistance and say, God, I don't believe in that. Whatever, fine. Then use the terms that Martin Buber said that there's an I-thou relationship rather than an I-it relationship. Or if that still sounds too mystical to you, then go back to Immanuel Kant and his language of seeing other people as subjects and not as objects. However you want to language it, this is a very different consciousness than the dominant consciousness, and it's what we call the spiritual consciousness. And similarly, when looking at the physical world, a spiritual consciousness is one that doesn't simply say, gee, we're not using our resources in a totally rational way. We can use these resources in a better way. It's one that it doesn't look at the physical world and say, I wonder if there's something I could sell here. Maybe I could turn this tree into something that would make money for me. Instead, it looks at the physical world from the standpoint of wonder at the grandeur of what is there. That's a spiritual consciousness. Now, what we discovered was the following about people in this world, the world of work that I talked to you about a moment ago. That when people spend all day long in the world of work, in which they are focused primarily on in a situation where they have to maximize money for those who have wealth and power, that they come home feeling very upset about this, even as they simultaneously believe it's impossible to change. And what they're upset about is that they want a framework of meaning for their life. They want to connect to something that has higher power, has higher vision, that connects them to something they can believe in. And when we first started discovering this, we thought, oh, this is baloney. This can't possibly be true. Because everything that we had learned in academia, and everything we had learned in the left or in the liberal and progressive world, and in psychology was that we, the elites, have meaning needs, but they, the rest of the population, they only have material needs. And what we were discovering in our actual research was that this hunger for meaning and purpose was pervasive throughout the society, and that it was a tremendous crisis in people's lives, that they had no opportunity to connect to meaning and purpose for their lives in their world of work. Now, so you have people coming home from work with this hunger for that, and at the same time, simultaneously, a sense, when we talked about it with people and their first response is, yeah, but there's nothing you can do about it. That's just what the real world is. That's how it is. There's just no way to change that. And then on the other hand, they have personal lives in which they feel they are never seen in the spiritual way that I talked to you about a second ago. That a huge number of people report that they are never seen as being fundamentally valuable. They are always seen in what I call instrumental or utilitarian terms. What can you do for me? Even husband and wife. Partners, lovers, always thinking in terms of, well, what are you doing for me? What's in it for me? How much am I getting back from you? And even with children, what have you done for me lately, Dad? What have you done for me lately, Mom? And people who are in this situation in which they neither have recognition of the sort that I call a spiritual recognition, which people can see you for who you are, but instead are saying to us, nobody recognizes, nobody ever sees me. They only see me about what I can do for them, but never they don't get me as a being. And I never get that experience of being perceived, or at least very, very rarely, if not never, very, very rarely do I ever feel anybody seeing me outside of the framework of how I can be of use. And that's your personal experience in life, your personal life. And then in the work world, you're doing work that has no meaning and purpose, and other than to maximize money or power for somebody else. When these two things coincide, you get a spiritual crisis in American society, a deep spiritual crisis. And the terrible news for liberals and progressives and those of us who want to change the society is this, that the right, the political right, was the first group to recognize and articulate this. And just as the women's movement gained tremendous power when it was able to articulate the pain that women were feeling, but it had no name, until the feminist movement came along and said, oh, that's sexism, that's the result of patriarchy, that's the result of chauvinism. And way before the women's movement was able to deliver significant change, just their ability to name it earned them tremendous respect and commitment on the part of many, many women who felt such a relief at understanding this. So the political right has done that for a very large number of people in the society. It has given them a language to understand that there is something deeply wrong in their lives. And that language is the spiritual crisis, and the excess of materialism and selfishness. Now, the terrible thing is that the right then goes on to blame the materialism and selfishness on the demeaned others of the society. And so this is a universal formula. Wherever you go in the world, when you find a right-wing movement, whether it be political or religious, that is successful, it's one that correctly articulates the spiritual deprivations that people are feeling on the one hand, and then unfairly blames whoever is the demeaned other of that society on the other hand. And so in the 20th century, for the first half of the 20th century, that was Jews in Europe. Today in Europe, it's increasingly Muslims who are the ones who get in this position. But if you go to Muslim societies, to some Muslim societies, well, it's the Kurds, or it's whoever is, wherever you are, whoever is the historic demeaned other is the one that gets the blame. In the United States, of course, the primary demeaned others of our society have historically been Native Americans and African Americans. But in the last 30 years, the right in its magnanimity has tried to extend this category to include in it feminists, gays and lesbians, and increasingly liberals and all liberals and all secular people, actually, in the last few years. Now, the irony, of course, is that the right is the primary champion of the ethos of selfishness and materialism in the world of work. Because in the world of work, the right is always the force that is championing the right of every corporation to pursue its own self-interest without regard to the consequences for others, and saying that we want less government to regulate, to restrain, or to demand any kind of social responsibility, right? So how do they get away with this? On the one hand, champion of let every corporation pursue their own self-interest. On the other hand, championing and articulating the pain that people have when having spent all day in a world of work in which they're learning selfishness and materialism, they bring that home into personal life. It's a huge contradiction. How do they get away with it? They get away with it because the liberal and progressive forces aren't even in the relevant ballpark. They don't understand that there's a spiritual crisis in the society, and very often, because of the long history of the left having emerged in struggle with the feudalist society several hundred years ago, in which the central underpinning of feudalism was religion and various beliefs in God, the left is filled with anger at God, and that transmits into anger at and putting down of people into religious or spiritual consciousness. So that then makes it easy for the right to become the champion of the spiritual issues. And now it's more complicated than this. I'm giving you a very simple part of this stuff, and I have a much more sophisticated articulation of it in this book that's just come out in paperback. It's called The Left Hand of God. It was in hardback last year, a national bestseller, and it tells the story in a lot more detail. I'm recognizing that I'm telling it in a very, say, vulgarized way in order to get it all out. But this then has led us to say, okay, if the left has been unable to recognize the spiritual crisis in society, we need a spiritual progressive movement. And that's why I and Cornel West and Sister Joan Chittister started this new organization 2 years ago called the Network of Spiritual Progressives, which came out of some of the work we have been doing in Tikkun magazine, which is going around. And you can find us, the Network of Spiritual Progressives, on the web at www.spiritualprogressives.org, www.spiritualprogressives.org. Okay. What's the spiritual progressives about? Well, I'm not going to talk about all parts because I do want to get to questions and answers or whatever. So I'm just going to tell you one part, which is the central thing. Our central demand is this. We want a new bottom line in American society. A new bottom line. In more technical terms, we'll put it this way. Today, institutions or social practices are judged efficient or rational or productive, both on the individual and collective level, to the extent that they maximize money and power. We are saying that institutions, whether that be corporations, whether that be our legal system, our medical system, our healthcare system, our education system, whatever the system is, whatever you're judging about efficiency, productivity, rationality, that they should be judged that not only to the extent that they maximize money and power, but also to the extent that they maximize love and caring, kindness and generosity, ethical and ecological sensitivity, enhance our capacities to respond to other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, and enhance our capacity to respond to the universe with awe and wonder and radical amazement at the grandeur of all that is. So that's a very different bottom line. Yeah, you want me to repeat it? Okay. That institutions should be judged rational, efficient, and productive, not only to the extent that they maximize money and power, but also to the extent that they maximize love and caring, kindness and generosity, ethical and ecological sensitivity, enhance our capacities to respond to other human beings as embodiments of the sacred, or however you want to language that, see them as fundamentally valuable for who they are, and enhance our capacity to respond to the universe with awe and wonder and radical amazement at the grandeur of all that is. Okay? Got it? Okay, now if you think about this as a new bottom line, you'll quickly see that all of our institutions are irrational, inefficient, and unproductive. They don't tend to produce loving and caring people. They don't maximize people's capacities to be ethically or ecologically sensitive, or to respond to the universe with awe and wonder, or any of that. Now you might say, well, wait a second, are you saying that nobody is loving and caring in society? No, we're not saying that. We're saying that people are loving and caring and have these qualities despite the institutions in which they live, not because of them. And it's always a fight. People have to feel like they're idealistic to go for these values and that they're struggling for them rather than to be nurtured and supported in them. So we're saying that a spiritual movement, a progressive spiritual movement, is one that is calling for a new bottom line, a fundamental rethinking of all aspects of the society based on this criterion. Does it produce more love and caring? Does it produce more generosity? Does it produce more ethical and ecological sensitivity? Does it enhance our capacity to respond to other human beings as fundamentally valuable, or to the universe as embodiment of as something that we respond to not just in a used way, but also just seeing it as inherently valuable? Does it do that? Now, this is a general principle. Okay, so this is what we're about, new bottom line. But then you might say, oh, very nice, but how does that translate into anything real in politics? And so that's where we developed in the book, and also a shortened version of it online, the Spiritual Covenant with America. It has 8 points about how you do this, translated into healthcare, and how you do it in relationship to families, and how you do it in relationship to a whole variety of different issues. I'm going to take one, because it's the one that is most pressing at this historical moment, and that some of you have already seen is translated here into an ethical way to end the war in Iraq, and it's going around. But it's this. In relationship to foreign policy, what is a spiritual approach to foreign policy? A spiritual approach to foreign policy says the following.